As the Indian diaspora celebrates Diwali this week, the festival's rising popularity here is one of the many benefits of Australia's multicultural makeup. But as more South Asians call Australia home, there are growing concerns that they're bringing the Hindu caste system with them.
A recent report by the Human Rights Commission into Australian racism found that caste discrimination here is both pervasive and systemic as well. Well, Asang Wakende led the research, and I spoke to him earlier.
So, caste system is a form of social stratification where a whole society is divided, and predominantly Hindu society is been divided based on caste, based on your birth. So, the moment you're born, you automatically are assigned a caste because of your family's caste. What caste brings and does is it establishes a system. Of course, it's a ranking-based system, but also establishes a system of privileges and sanctions on people from various castes. So what essentially it means is that if you're born into the higher caste, you would have a range of privileges just because of your birth. And if you're part of the lowest caste, the Dalits, then you would face a lot of discrimination and disadvantage and exclusion just because of your caste identity.
Now, Australia is mainly an egalitarian society, so I think most people would be surprised to learn that the caste system has been imported here and that, as you found, it's systemic. How so?
The Australian Human Rights Commission had already recognized caste as form of intersectional racial discrimination. So in their scoping report for the National Anti-Racism Framework, they recognized that caste is prevalent. Now, when we did our study, and the evidence that we have over 600 pages shows that first, caste is pervasive in all aspects of Australian life, and second, and more crucially, is also systemic. In the employment context, people who are sitting for an interview are outrightly asked what your caste is. And based on that, they are, of course, not selected if they tell openly. And there were many instances where people tried to pass off initially, but when the boss got to know that, okay, they have actually passed off and they are actually from this lower caste, they went on to make the environment in the company so hostile that they had to ultimately leave because they were not giving promotions. There were no sort of growth opportunities there.
You also found that discrimination wasn't just limited to within the South Asian diaspora. Some of the survey respondents told you that it affected their boss's opinion of them.
And they said that how it worked was that they had colleagues from the upper caste who were just below them. And they were having those sort of conversations that if a person comes from a lower caste, they are inherently lacking in merit. And when that sort of power dynamic happens, then the bosses, and there's an instance, and I can give you an anecdotal example. A boss in the company, and of course I cannot name it for confidentiality, went around asking its South Asian workforce in the company, what is your caste? And this was taken by a shock by many of them. And they could see after they expressed their caste to their white Caucasian boss that immediately, within few months, they were either made to leave or they had to resign because of the conditions that were created.
Okay, so you've just taken us through the employment sector. What about discrimination within society itself, within the South Asian diaspora?
Children have been facing a lot of discrimination in Australia, especially in schools. So how it happens is that, and how I was able to understand what is happening is, a lot of the South Asian migrant communities, they really reside in pockets and in, of course, the suburban pockets. So what ends up happening is that for the local public schools, the children that would end up going up predominantly from a particular sort of racial background, so for example, the South Asians. Mother explaining to us that how their children are made to sit outside a particular house when they're invited to a birthday party, when a particular religious ritual is happening, because their presence in that ritual itself is defiling.
Asang, Australia has the Racial Discrimination Act, and is that enough to address caste discrimination, or does it need to perhaps be amended to recognise this sort of abuse within a race?
There are various grounds under Section 9 of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975. It starts with race, then is, of course, color, work, decent, national ethnicity, and your immigration status, so on and so forth. There is no mention of caste there. So the whole advocacy project that we are now leading is to actually call for that amendment to be made. Our request and our petition and our evidence is now going into the National Anti-Racism Framework. We have submitted all our documents to them. And for example, if caste is considered as part of the National Anti-Racism Framework, then of course it will go ahead and be submitted to the federal government. And on the sides of it, we will also be constantly working towards recognizing caste within the Racial Discrimination Act. Yeah.
Asang Waghenda, they're speaking to us a little earlier